Welcome to the panel on Navigating Impact Investing, the Pursuit of Clarity and Simplicity. I'm Kathy Clark, Director of the CASE Impact Investing Initiative at Duke University. And we have an amazing panel here today, and we're really looking forward to the discussion. I wanted to start by giving a little context to this panel and maybe refer to some of the things that were said this morning, because we had an awful lot of really provocative and interesting conversations that were started already. The genesis of this panel is to look at what are the different ways that people who are stepping into the field of impact investing are finding what they need to find to do good work. And is this as easy as it needs to be? Are we making it too hard? Or what can we do to make this better? And so we wanted to step back this morning and talk a little bit about the state of play as the field develops. And what are the things that are maybe holding us back that we could make easier? Before I get started, I did want to mention that we have a hashtag for this session. If you want to tweet us, the hashtag is Make Impact Investing Easy. That's IMPINV, easy, which is a good goal. And I also wanted to give a little bit of background on how this panel came about specifically, which is that we've been doing some work for the past year, a group called Timeline and myself, on the idea of segmenting the field of impact investing. And we've put out a working paper a few months ago, back in July, that's called Navigating Impact Investing, that you can find online. But one of the things that emerged from this study that we did was realizing that often the conditions or assumptions of capital are not explicit as it passes hands of impact capital. And we became really interested in the idea of, if we're really trying to have a conversation about risk, return, and impact, are we really classifying impact in ways that work for all? And so we may talk about that a little bit today. We have two panels on this topic. Today is one of them. The second one, it will be Thursday at 11, which is looking at impact matchmaking, specifically looking at what are the ways that you have conversations with clients who are interested in getting into this field, and what are the things that are making that go a little bit better and make that easier. But this panel is actually much broader than just new clients. This panel is looking at all kinds of stakeholders who are trying to step in under the broad tent of impact investing. And we want to think about what different players can do to make this easier. So to get started, I'm actually going to ask our panelists to introduce themselves in kind of a rapid-fire introduction, to tell us their name and their organization, and a little thought about why or how impact investing is more complicated than regular old, plain vanilla, everyday investing. Nick?
Thanks, Kathy. So I'm Nick O'Donoghue. I am currently a senior advisor to the Gates Foundation. Prior to that, I was the Chief Executive Officer of Big Society Capital in the UK, and prior to that, I was the senior sponsor of the social finance group at JP Morgan. And I suppose the question of why is impact investment more complicated is that the answer, to my mind, is a relatively simple one, because we are not just focused on risk and return, we're focused on risk, return, and impact, and it's that third question that we're trying to ask, and how we quantify that and answer that makes this field just a lot more interesting, worthwhile, but also a lot more complex.
Great. Giselle?
Hi, good morning. My name is Giselle Lung. I'm with the Global Impact Investing Network, or the GIN for short. We're a nonprofit organization dedicated to increasing the scale and effectiveness of impact investing through research and education, developing tools and infrastructure. We're also home to the largest global community of impact investing organizations, engaging over 220 members in 33 countries. So I think Nick took one of the response I had in mind, which is the need to be able to understand how your investments and leverage impact measurement to understand whether you're really successful in providing shelter for low-income tenants or ensuring that children have access to affordable and quality education. The other piece that I will say how impact investing is distinct from traditional market is that this is a really exciting space with very diverse players, from foundations, family offices, institutional investors, all have distinct impact orientation, risk appetite, and also return expectations. So it creates opportunities for collaboration, but much of the partnerships and the collaboration in deal structuring actually don't have a lot of precedence. So there's a lot of experimentation, a lot of creativity involved. So I think that really adds to the excitement or the interesting aspects of impact investing.
Great, thank you.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having us up here today. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Yasmin Salto, and I'm here from the Omidyar Network, which I joined last year. Prior to that, I was also at JP Morgan working with Nick, building out the social finance business there. In terms of the question, why is this market more challenging to navigate? I think it comes down to, well, there are several reasons, but I think one of the things that I'm focused on the most today is the fact that we don't have a clear language to articulate what impact we're trying to have and have a clear conversation that matches with the counterpart who's on the other side of the conversation, whether that's an investor or an investee. So to make a quirky analogy here, it's kind of like going into a Starbucks and saying, I'd like a foamy sweet coffee, when you really want a caramel macchiato. So I feel like there's a taxonomy that will emerge over time as we all become clearer at articulating what we're hoping to achieve with our capital or with our business. And I think that there will be a consolidation of those goals. So as we begin to each articulate more clearly what we're hoping to achieve, it will also become clear where there's more overlap between our goals. So impact goals are very, very personal. They're driven by our personal experience. So for me, my Turkish origin, my grandfather's Parkinson's disease, and the fact that my children go to a state school in East London, those are key driving factors of the way I want to drive my work and my capital towards the goals that I have. But how much will that overlap with Nick and Giselle and Debbie? And so I think that there will be, one, a need for clearer language around what our goals are so that we can order the right coffee. And two, we need a map to understand where are the overlaps between all of our interests so that those who are trying to develop products to meet those interests, like Debbie, I'm sure we'll talk about this today, have a better sense for where to focus their energy in developing those products.
Thanks. I want to follow up on a bunch of those, but we're going to let Debbie introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Debbie McCoy with BlackRock. I think I'm not on. Yeah, I think the AV team has to turn me on.
I think so.
Yes. We'll wait.
Excuse me.
Till then. Thanks for being here.
Sure. One of our first people isn't on. Debbie, can you turn her on? It's Debbie. Excuse us momentarily.
Maybe now? Not now.
Maybe the battery died?
Yep.
Yay.
Oh, the battery did not die. It's the old-fashioned things that you don't think about sometimes. Right. More on
Details
batteries
matter.
in the energy session, I'm sure. Good morning, everyone. I'm Debbie McCoy. I work for BlackRock. BlackRock is an investment firm. We're global. We have retail and institutional clients, including sovereigns. And we have an impact investing unit. That's actually not even a great word. And I'm going to answer the question by describing why that's not the best word. We have more than 100 investment teams at BlackRock. And our investment teams cut across all kinds of strategies in capital markets, in return-focused portfolios, if only because we've always worked in markets. That's our mandate. What is challenging and interesting at the very same time about, you've asked for the differentiation between traditional financial markets and impact capital markets, is this question of the impact being introduced to risk and return objectives. So for the hundreds and thousands of investors around the world who've learned traditional finance to be risk and return characteristics incorporated into a portfolio for the purpose of generating a return, now introducing a new objective, which would be impact, and one that does not yet have an objective and set of agreed upon definitions, does present some pretty unique challenges, but also opportunities to the investment team. So it is the same answer as Nick. I couldn't be more creative than that, but it is true. Integrating something new into risk and return changes everything, and we're really excited about that.
Fantastic. So this morning we had a panel of very successful impact investing funds talking about their journey towards scale. And we had a panel about people saying, well, we have to be really careful that we don't forget to really dive in deep to the questions about impact. And then Jen Emerson, my colleague, came up and said, this is always going to be hard. He basically said, you always have to activate on this. Even if we standardize it, it's a challenge to do this. So I wanted to bring that back to this question of, can we make it just a little bit easier? If we're trying to mainstream, what are the signs? Is it really big funds? Is it different kinds of standards? What do we think is the linchpin that maybe is slowing us down? Nick, I'm going to start with that.
Look, I agree with Jed that this is always going to be more complicated than straightforward investing for all the reasons that we've sort of offered up here. I do think, and my experience in this field now is probably 8, 9 years, so longer probably than some of the other people in the room. I don't think we've necessarily made it easy for ourselves, to be honest. I mean, I think at the beginning, to some extent, the impact investment conversation was being dominated by sort of high levels of financial engineering, where we were trying to develop a whole new type of security, which I think has a value. But I think initially for people looking at the field, they sort of balked at that because it just was too complicated. So we had too many financial engineers and not enough people who really understood, I think, some of the issues that we were trying to solve. So I think that was one of the issues. I think the segmentation question that you mentioned earlier, which is related to that, has also been a challenge in the sense that I always used to say when I used to speak at these type of conferences, if somebody came into the back of the room and they knew nothing about impact investment, and they listened to the conversation, and they knew a little bit about finance and a little bit about some social issues, they would say, well, this is a fascinating conversation and sounds really good, but aren't they all talking about completely different things? And so I've been on a lot of panels where that is clearly, there's been just a lack of a thread running through the conversation. And I think the other thing that has been a challenge for us too is identifying what problems we're trying to solve. I mean, I guess working now and advising the Gates Foundation, one of the great beauties about Gates is that they're very clear about in most cases, very clear about the problems they want to solve. They want to eradicate malaria, they want to eradicate polio, very clear targets for achieving social impact and social good. I think we have, if you ask the question of the impact investment world, if you fast forward 5 or 10 years, what problem, important problem, will impact investment solve? I don't think we've answered that question, and I think we need to think through, capital is good for certain things, it's not good for other things, and I think we need to probably have a clearer view on on exactly where, the other thing I've learned at the Gates Foundation, as I mentioned this morning, is that there are a lot of problems that capital will not solve. So I think it's important that we think about, what are these key problems, key issues, identify them and have some ambitions in terms of what we want to have achieved in 10 years from now.
So it's interesting that you say that, because this frame of kind of defining the problem that you want to solve, when we had conversations throughout the year about this idea of segmenting the field, what some people said to us, what you really need to do is you need to organize theories of change into categories that people can recognize. And of course, then you come up against, well, how many different theories of change are there? Well, there's probably millions. And so to be very concrete, for Giselle, who works with the GIN, we have, 360 IRIS metrics. I think we have 260 questions when we certify a B corporation. Is there a way to simplify this in ways that are rational for the kinds of things that people are trying to accomplish?
So I think we talk about how, in the opening remarks, we all mentioned the need to measure impact. And I think to answer your question about how to make this easier or provide greater clarity, I think what is really crucial is for us to change the narrative of impact measurement from being complicated and costly to being essential and in a way that you can do with efficiency as well as effectiveness. I think the market is certainly moving to that direction. And most recently, this is part of the GIN's effort in how to simplify and really provide very pragmatic guidance on how to go about impact measurement. So it is true that the IRIS catalog of metrics, for those of you in the audience not familiar with it, is a set of commonly used metrics that are organized in different ways, principally around sectors of focus. There are now actually over 500 metrics. But one thing I want to underscore is that it is not about using all of these metrics, and we're now driving and a lot of the efforts along with partners in the field in providing guidance so that once you're able to determine what kind of an impact objective or strategy you want to pursue, we're going to help you, give you a tool to identify the relevant metrics to make it easy. And this is very much the evolution of the market. We spend 2010 just trying to explain why impact measurement matters and what IRIS and what metrics are. So I think the space is definitely evolving, and this is just the arc of the industry on its way to realize its potential. There's a lot of work that we need to do collectively and together. But at the GIN, we're quite optimistic that we can, that we're addressing the evolving needs, and just on the issue on metrics and impact measurement, there are a lot of exciting initiatives at the GIN and other organizations trying to help folks understand how to carry that out.
So I guess one question I wanted to raise is, we're sitting here kind of focusing for a few minutes just on the problem, right? What is hard? Well, impact is hard. Impact is many different things to many different people. White stuff I want on my coffee is not very specific. And so then you can go to IRIS and you can say, well, I can choose one of 500 things, and then it becomes very complex. What else is hard for people trying to put a new fund together? What is hard for entrepreneurs with the lack of clarity that we have about impact? I wonder if Debbie or Yasmin, you would like to talk about the nature of this curve that people need, learning curve that people need to go through to really get in.
Sure, I'll jump in on that one. I think that there's a challenge in deal sourcing. I mean, at the end of the day, we are talking about mainstreaming the market. When people talk about that, we tend to reference bringing in institutional investor capital, right? But I think at the end of the day, the bottleneck is, well, what is the universe of investable, revenue-generating, impactful interventions in the field, on the ground? And how does that pipeline relate impact-wise and financially back to what the investors need? And I think the role of the intermediaries there is a critical one in, again, coming back to the matchmaking on the impact story and then mapping or overlaying the financial criteria that is appropriate both for the underlying investee and for the investor. So it's kind of a multi-dimensional matchmaking taking place. And I don't think that there's going to be an iPhone for impact investing, like a revolutionary technology that's suddenly going to unleash all this matchmaking in a much easier way. It's just going to be organic. I think there will be a natural growth. There'll be a period of consolidation as things that don't work kind of fall to the wayside as well. And I think it's just a matter of working together with people who share similar goals for impact and for financial and return and risk to identify what works in the sectors you're trying to support. So, when we're investing in education, one of the most important things is working with our co-investors on sourcing new deals. And it's that universe of your peers working with the same goals in mind that I think will help to refine the process. And if that group of investors working on that education space can share their learnings, whether it's through publications, through workshops, through panels like this, then I think that is the process by which this then becomes easier for new entrants looking at education, for example.
Mm-hmm. So Debbie, I wonder if we could turn to you, because you at BlackRock have a different set of stakeholders than many of the other people on the panel who are, foundation or membership organizations. How have you guys started to simplify this
Yes.
territory?
Yes. I'll actually start, I think, where Yasmin has left us, which is the question of goals. So maybe I can just offer a couple of observations that I've been seeing. I've spent a fair bit of time with investors here in the US, also across Europe and Asia in the last 12 to 18 months. So this goals question, and I actually want to maybe orient us also to the opening plenary. I thought there was a great charge for us to not be considering only the how, but also the why. And this question of goals really is, why does any investor or group of investors or group of individuals responsible for making investment decisions that impact others, like pension managers, why does anyone have a goal to incorporate something aside from risk and return in a portfolio to begin with? So with clients, in terms of a framework, we often and really need to, unless an investor has themselves already decided, we know why we're interested in a particular set of non-risk return, or let me say, observable risk return, because I think future risk return is a big consideration for many, so I want to include that. If an investor has already gone through this set of considerations, great. If not, there's a very first order conversation to have, which is, why are you interested in, and by the way, what are you interested in? And I will say this, a number of large investors don't know yet, because their boards maybe didn't have this at the top of an agenda until a few years ago. And so they themselves are working out why and what matters most to us. Our investment teams, we do need to know what's important so that we can help then curate what would go into a portfolio and not. So let me just give a couple of frameworks. I tend to see and we tend to find, and we are certainly thinking of in the how, the implementation, how might we offer broad solutions that incorporate a number of kind of generally cited issue areas and impact that folks would like to see in their investment portfolios. So broad being one category. But then we do find extremely niche interest areas. And so we're seeing a kind of a barbelling. So broad to niche is probably one of the things we're seeing. And to simplify the world, it's easier, by the way, for an investment committee to have a conversation around high conviction issues. That would be the niche targeted ones versus broad. I think that raises and just goes back to this great question of scale versus customization. Financial services investors have dealt with this for a long time. I do think there's some underlying tension in just how many people, to the question of goals, care about the same issue, which is akin to the theory of change. What's beautiful about the world is we all get to have different points of view about how the world works and also what works in it to interact change upon the world. That's complicated for investment portfolios.
Indeed it is. Recently, on Monday, actually, there was a New York Times story about TPG Growth, which is one of the, if not the largest private equity firm in the world. Their intention to create $1 billion impact fund. In the conversation that we had the other night at Tideline, the person running this effort said that they were dedicated to outcomes at scale. Is that an oxymoron? To track, again, it's kind of the outcomes as opposed to just, good stuff happening that we can count of outputs, but real outcomes. Can we even attack that in the structures that we have?
I think, sorry.
You want to jump in?
Go for it.
I will, just with a quick point. At BlackRock, we're extremely interested in outcomes because we are finding that a more common ground than what's the issue I care about is what is the outcome on society. And so, for example, last year we launched a strategy where in the prospectus we discussed the impact outcomes that would be part of the portfolio construction. We do have a view that the transparency of what are outcomes that are being targeted and then the measurement and disclosure of what's actually happening is extremely important because it actually helps get the argument away from who thinks what is more important. That's a very valid argument, but when it gets down to the how, the brass tacks, what will I do to make my portfolio, I sit in an investment team and there does come a point of decision. The outcome can be the thing that tells us, oh, well, we committed to the Securities and Exchange Commission and all of our investors that we would do these things. This is so simple. We're going to have these outcomes in the portfolio. So we are a fan of outcome orientation.
So one of the things that has occurred to me over the past year, and I don't think I've ever thought about it quite this way before, is realizing that there are so many different outcomes that people care about, but, and I've thought about this before, but really kind of honing in on it, but we cannot expect every investment to maximize all of them, right? That this idea of maximizing every iris metric or getting a perfect score, or there's all these different lenses that we're now thinking about. We're thinking about minorities, we're thinking about women, we're thinking all these really good things. We're thinking about income generation, we're thinking about sustainability, but you can't actually, as a business, maximize all of those. So one of the things that we started to think about is, well, could you actually ask people to classify themselves with the thing that they are most committed to? Could you put a label on that capital? Right? So impact capital being, capital that has a priority on it. How does that seem to you as a potential way of kind of, and does it make it easier? The reason I wanted to ask it after what you said, Debbie, is because you brought up the fact that when you're really talking about doing this in the real world, it's not enough to articulate your goal. You have to align all the systems down the chain for what the accountability and the choices and the evaluation of that is going to be. Would this help?
So maybe I would take that question to the level of the portfolio.
Okay.
So instead of saying every impact dollar has to have a label or a tag and the goal that it wants to maximize, I think if we think about it at a portfolio level, right? I mean, even when you think about the just purely financial investments, we don't always seek to maximize return, right? Because then you would take a whole lot of risk. And so you build a balanced portfolio between high return and high risk investments and lower return, lower risk investments. And I think the same can be true on the impact side. So you want a balanced portfolio if you have 5 key metrics or 5 key goals. You want a portfolio that balances across them. Also because we're not thinking about this in a vacuum. I mean, we are also concerned and considered on the financial side of the story. So we need to be building a balanced portfolio across all 3 of those dimensions.
And in this conversation about just outcomes and whether it can be at scale, I think part of the central issue there, scale or not, is really making sure that when we're talking about outcomes and when we have gone through the necessary steps to say this is the kind of difference we want to see throughout portfolio companies, this is a strategy we're pursuing, being able to, the process that both of you talk about is really central to ensuring the integrity of the space. Making sure that when we put our money where our mouth is, that we can actually see through the years through which we're putting our money, capital to work. So I think it's, when we talk about outcomes, I think it's really just about, how do we make sure as we build this industry with all these various and exciting opportunities, how to ensure that the integrity stays. And I think collectively we all very much care about that.
So I want to bring us down now. We've been talking about this problem at kind of the 30,000 foot level. Now I want to bring us down, because you guys are all doing amazing work inside your organizations, to talk a little bit more granularly about your own experience. For example, at the GIN, you guys have been really active and have put several reports out on how interesting it is when different parties come together and collaborate on deals, right? So this idea that everyone has their own impact and they just invest in what they want is not actually the way a lot of this works. People come together with different ideas of risk, return, and impact, and they actually find complementary ways to kind of construct layers or other things. Is that a complexity that we should embrace and support? And how has GIN helped to do that?
Certainly no silver bullet. Certainly is not just add the different mix, add water, stir, and boom, we get a transaction. And you're right, it is complex. And this is a time when many of the actors are embracing this challenge, recognizing the potential that is unique to impact investing. It's the fact that you can bring together a foundation who can take on some of the risk in order to create a risk-return profile that's more palatable to a more commercially minded investor, and then come together. So at the GIN, we're tackling this in a number of ways. One that is, we believe is really important is to be able to showcase these examples and really unpack, document through stories, through materials, how these transactions come together. What are the key considerations? Because it's really important to be able to bring the abstract and make it concrete.
So
right?
the make it easy strategy is to say, here are the elements that work for someone else that you can mimic and adapt for yourself.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then the other part of it is also, at the GIN, we serve as a platform that brings together practitioners. We're very intentional about giving them that space to roll up their sleeves so that they can really talk to each other about how they have worked and put together different structures that are layered in the way they're structured. And one example that I will give is we're currently running a working group looking at the use of guarantees. Credit enhancement is an important part and has great potential to really bring together different actors. So we have foundations with a higher risk appetite wanting to put guarantee at scale to use. And then we also have banks alongside talking to them and say, what are the lessons we've learned from transactions that we have made in the past? How can we make it more efficient? How can we make it more effective? And ultimately, there's a way of how to reduce the transaction cost and maybe do more deals at greater scale with efficiency. So I would say bringing the stories, making sure investments come to life while giving investors a platform to really learn and work with each other to solve and tackle real issues are the two ways that we are kind of paving the way.
That's great. I think as a researcher myself, and I respect a great deal the research that you guys do internally and with other partners, this idea of creating patterns across and kind of simplifying things to their core elements that other people can replicate is a huge, make it easy kind of a thing. And what's interesting to me is, have we gotten to the point where there are actually patterns, guarantees maybe one of them, that people can pick up off the shelf and not have to spend 6 months, a year, 2 years actually making work between different players. So that's great, important work. I'd love to turn to you, Yasmin, and talk a little bit about Omidyar Network's work. You guys have a broad array of tools, broader than most, because you have an LLC and you also have a foundation structure. And I think, I've had a lot of conversations with people at ON saying, well, this impact first, finance first debate, that's become a little stale. It's more rich and arrayed than that. Can you talk a little bit about what the experience at ON has been to make this complexity easy and what we can learn from that?
Sure. I mean, I think we're a very fortunate organization in that we are not investing on behalf of third-party clients. So we have the discretion to do what I think is quite revolutionary and really compelling to me, which is you identify the impactful intervention first and foremost. You see, what is this going to achieve? And then, if you can identify that the impact is there, then that it aligns with what the organization strategically is working towards, then we have a suite of financial tools that we can go to bring the right kind of capital to that intervention. So we have a spectrum, we have a continuum of capital, all the way from grants to fully commercial and then sub-commercial in between. Now the challenge for us has been, so move the debate away from finance first, impact first, to look at the single deal and identify what are the economics at that level. Do they make sense? Are they commercial? Are they sub-commercial? Are they grant appropriate? Yeah. And the trickiest point, of course, is that piece in the middle. I mean, finding a fully commercial deal is fairly straightforward, and identifying that a nonprofit should get some grant capital these are things that have been going on in the marketplace for a long time. The sub-commercial piece is the piece that's newer, and we're fortunate that we're not the only ones working on this challenge. But the hardest part for, I think, any institution who wants to use that kind of capital is identifying the conditions under which it's appropriate. Because no one wants to be the lazy investor who just says, oh, it's impact, okay, we'll take a lower return. You want to use that kind of capital is really valuable, right? So you want to use it where it's appropriate. And for us, it's come down to the definition of impact that we're trying to achieve. That's the condition. So when we're making any investment, we look for what's the direct impact on that firm or that organization's beneficiaries. So if it's a smallholder farmer program, what's the impact going to be on those smallholder farmers? When it comes to, and that's true for the grants through all the way to the commercial. All of them are held to the same bar on that direct level impact. When it comes to the sub-commercial opportunity set, we need not just more impact, we need an additional kind of impact to justify taking that trade-off on finance. So for us, and this I think is something everyone would have to define for their own portfolios, but for us, that additional kind of impact is what we call the market level impact. And that is essentially the demonstration effect that an organization can have on piloting a new model for a new market. So let's take, for example, MicroInsure, which is in our portfolio. At the time that organization started as a nonprofit, we saw the potential that they could operate as a for-profit. So we started with a grant to the organization to transition them to a for-profit. Then we invested some for-profit capital. But we had sub-commercial expectations there because they were working in a field. Insurance is a very abstract product, right? You're going to pay money today for something you may receive in the future, but you might not receive it. And it was a product that hadn't gained much traction in the low-income markets that MicroInsure wanted to serve. So we were testing a new business model with a new consumer segment. And we thought that if they could prove the model, that could have the impact of attracting others. And that would be the impact at scale. Back to your question about TPG. Beyond just the direct beneficiaries of MicroInsure, now you have companies like Bima and their customers. This is the broader market level impact that we feel it's worth taking a cut on the financial returns for it.
So
sorry, just to put one final point on it. Ideally, if it all works, to plan, then that company, that MicroInsure investment, eventually comes to a place where it is fully commercial. And then you have the fully sustainable financial story as well.
So just to, and I'll let you speak in a second on that, Rick. Nick, so it seems as if, to kind of rephrase your story and tell me if I get it right, it seems as if what you're saying is, first of all, there's a demonstration effect that we can have by showing that someone who had a very clear set of outcomes for bottom of the pyramid customers could actually succeed with their revenue and their growth projections, which sometimes people don't believe at the beginning. So you're going past perception of disbelief by showing that things work. Second, you're trying to actually create kind of a chain of capital from grant to investability and on that other people can replicate. I think there's a lot of other people in the space who are trying to do that. I don't think it's easy yet.
No.
I think those handoffs, we've been studying it. We work with USAID very closely on global health ventures and studying those handoffs, and the investors are not always very comfortable with them. The grant makers and the investors doing the handoff, and the entrepreneurs are stuck in the middle, trying to figure out what these two parties need from them and how to get their grant to pay for what the investor actually needs to see next, right? So some of that I think is actually not quite easy enough.
Agreed.
Even though it's on the right track. Did you want to interact there?
I just wanted to reinforce something that Yasmin said, and this is based on the experience we had at BSC, where our job was really funding into, providing sort of cornerstone funding for impact investment funds. And that is this idea, and we're talking about, we want to simplify this field, we don't want to complicate it. The critical question when you're making an impact investment, I think we evolved this over a couple of years, is who are the beneficiaries? That word beneficiaries to me is absolutely critical within the impact investment world. If you can't define who your beneficiaries are, and believe it or not, I have heard ideas pitched to me for so-called impact investment where the beneficiaries turn out to be recently graduated MBA graduates, for example, who I don't consider to be, I may be short of money initially, but
everybody's got needs. I don't know what you're talking about
as a deprived group. So I think this question of beneficiaries, who are your beneficiaries, how are you trying to help them, and some idea of how you're going to figure out whether you're actually doing that. Those are very simple questions that we can ask people who purport to be impact investment managers, which they need to be able to answer. And I think the other simple question that you need to ask people is, what is the governance process around the way that you invest this money that ensures that impact is really going to be at the forefront of what you do? And to some extent, I think our position became this was more about impact management than about impact measurement. And people would come up with some very complicated ways, and we're talking here about simplification, very complicated ways of measuring this outcome and that outcome. And really, that was less relevant to our decision than, who is it that sits on your investment committee that actually wears the impact hat, that wakes up every morning saying, who are we trying to help with? Who is this investment group trying to help? I thought TPG, and you referenced TPG's announcement, they clearly are addressing this issue through effectively outsourcing that role. But at least you see that and I think that's a sensible thing for an organization like that to do. But it sits at least you can see it sits at the core of what they're trying to do. I think those simple questions about beneficiary and governance are really critical.
I think those are great points. And part of it is, realizing that all of this, right, there is actually a history of decades around impact evaluation and assessment that we are trying to simplify and make feasible for this kind of investing, right? We can't all do random control trials on all of these things. And so it's I feel like we're in a pioneering phase of a decade or more, and maybe it'll take another decade until we have something that is a little more off the shelf and is paid for. I mean, what's innovative about what TPG is doing is they're saying, we're actually going to value this. We're going to pay for it. It's part of what we need to do to make this work. And I understand that you actually have a team at BlackRock who is doing a lot of this work internally, especially around climate issues. Maybe you could help us understand what that work is like for you.
Well, I'll amplify beyond just that work, and I think speak a bit more generally, really from the point of departure where we've left beneficiaries. So we're in a wide tent arena here at SOCAP. Institutional capital flows, just to give a kind of rough sense, I was looking at some numbers last year, and while direct private investing is extremely core in the impact investing history and community, also investor portfolios do have listed and liquid assets in them. And so if you look at just global data around how portfolios are invested, a minority of investors are getting access to private transactions, in large part because if you're an individual, you'd need to be a high net worth individual to invest in private equity. And if you're an institution, you actually also need enough capital wherewithal to tolerate the illiquidity. Basically, what if I invest in a private equity structure and I can't liquidate my assets? For some investors with a lot of capital and a great array of diversification, this is something done regularly. And then for other investors, even some small endowments that I speak with, it's actually quite hard for them to find tolerance for not having liquid assets. So that's a lot of preamble to say, we are thinking a lot about listed and not listed assets. I want to focus a little bit on the listed side of things. I thought Matthew Weatherly-White's great 12 minutes thinking about what's the role of, and you've mentioned climate, that's just one of many important environmental factors. Environment, social governance, these are not the only things thought about, but I do want to treat a little bit what we're hearing and thinking. A couple of things are going on. The beneficiaries, to this question of who's the beneficiaries, it is a bit of an abstract question. Who's the beneficiary of any old listed company in the world? Well, it's kind of all of us, because if you're a big enough company, actually, certainly if you're large cap, what you do actually could impact me. And by the way, I might not have a great voice in that. I'm not on your board, I'm not on the executive team, but if you decide to do something, not just a bad thing, but also a good thing, I might have an iPhone in my pocket that I wouldn't have had 15 years ago, or I might have some health problem because of pollution, good and bad, right? So we're all the beneficiaries or experience what companies are doing. What this means for investors is, I think, three things. Some investors are saying to us, could you help us look at our portfolio and understand more what are the outcomes that the companies that we're invested in are having? So some of the work we've done on climate, but there's a much broader set of research work that we do, is really helping our clients understand this is what you own today, and we could help you understand a little bit more about what you own today. Some folks see that and they say, oh, right, that's very interesting. What if I wanted to exaggerate a certain set of things or maybe minimize a certain set of things? Well, then that actually gets into the action of where our investment teams get into play, creating and thinking about, well, now what would you do? And then certainly we find some people say, well, actually, this first question of what's in my portfolio brought us to a much broader philosophical point. What's our investment mandate? What do we do? And then we're right back where we started, where often I find investors are getting to a more full spectrum of their liquid. Some are thinking about direct impact because they say, well, large big companies would never do the thing I care about, so maybe I need to more proactively look for that. They can do this if they have a mandate. So I'll give an example. My mother is a teacher in a public school in California. She is 70. She'll retire at some point. There's a pension manager for her. Many of you would know if you're based here in California. She doesn't get a right to tell that pension manager, here's the 5 issues I care about, please put it in my portfolio. Someone there is going to do some thinking about the issues that matter. The question of mandate and investing other people's money and being responsible as a fiduciary to make sure there's a pension paycheck versus investing your own money is a really big distinction. And so I always encourage investors to think about, well, if you have an impact mandate from your constituents, this is great. If you have a lot of flexibility, there's a wide range of tools. If you don't have an explicit mandate, then you'll have to do some thinking about how do you implement. And so that's a little bit how we're thinking about tying our research, the kind of insights we draw in, to the practical realities of which investors can actually invest in what manner.
Great, thanks, Debbie. So we're on this main stage with the big lights, and it seems very official, but we actually did want to open this up for questions. I don't think we have any roving mics, but if you stand up and you yell, I will repeat your question. And it looks like we have, oh, you do have mics. Excellent, we're set. So would anyone like to ask questions of the panel? Anything at all? There's one.
And there's
Orange
those with that.
wristband in the middle.
And those with that.
And there's one over here. I can't see. Okay.
Hi. Thanks for your time today. I guess I am pretty new to this, so I came to this session hoping for simplicity and clarity. And
Did you get it?
it sounds like we've earmarked and framed the complexity of it pretty well. So I guess I know what I'm getting into. But I guess for a simple question, would you consider an investment in Tesla to be an impact investment? And whether you say yes or no, what are a few others on that level, by notoriety, impact, all of it, that you could throw out there?
Who wants to take that?
I'm guessing that's coming straight down to me since it's a listed entity. It depends. I can't make life simple. That's the good news. And that makes life interesting and gives us a lot to talk about. Sorry, I failed. It depends. It really depends on your mandate. It depends on what do you believe as an investor. It depends on what do you think about a range of issues. It does mean analysis is required. I'll refrain from calling out any particular companies, just given the role that I'm in, but I would encourage everyone, if you're thinking of one particular company, there's a risk, I think, of isolating good and bad outside of how the world works. And I thought, Yasmin's comments around the portfolio, Kathy, you mentioned thinking about aggregate outcomes, and the more abstract question, can you solve for everything at once? I'm not sure. So I have had a lot of interesting debates around lots of types of investing with clients, and actually in the same room from the same clients, I get the equal and opposite answer, which is always very interesting because they themselves realize they had a fully different view than the other. They just had never discussed it before. So talking about what you think really matters.
Great. I'm going to leave it at that so we can get another question.
Yasmin, you mentioned taking a non-profit to a for-profit. Have you ever looked at taking a for-profit to non-profit, and what are the challenges with that?
Oh,
Nick has something to say.
go ahead.
That is something we did look at in the UK. It's also something that actually specifically happened in there's a specific example in Australia of a very large childcare business that went from a for-profit to a non-profit very successfully. So it does happen. Unfortunately, it tends to happen mostly, or only happens, when companies are in distress. So if the choice is the company goes out of business or somebody steps in and tries to take social, was the expression that was used in the UK. So I suppose my answer is it can happen, it has happened, it's difficult, and it's probably never going to be something that's going to happen in huge. What we may get is change to the extent there's alternative legal forms available, as there are now in many states in the US. You may get many for-profit companies deciding to change legal form into that more the B Corp, benefit corp type of structure. But to go purely into a nonprofit would be very difficult. Would be difficult.
So technically, in the U.S. at least, if you are taking assets, intellectual and other, that are from a for-profit company, there has to be a market transaction between the for-profit and the nonprofit. You can't just suddenly. I guess it's the other way around. Yeah. Others in the back? Yes. In the middle there.
There's one there too.
In the spirit of simplicity, over here.
Great. Sorry.
In the spirit of simplicity, I wonder if you could all name one attribute or skill or quality that you look for in your investees, and then one thing you would like to see, one capacity that you see lacking in your experience.
Great. So qualities of investees, positive and lacking.
Quality in investees is an ability to speak the language both of impact and finance, because I think we have a lot of challenges in this sector and this area, because very often we're bringing together people who have a very financial mindset with people who've spent their entire lives, in many cases, trying to address key social issues. They speak a different language. And I think it's important for the financial people to really learn to speak the sort of the issue-based language, and it's also important the other way around for the issue-based, for the people who are at the front line to also appreciate learn the language and appreciate the language of finance. And
so that's both a quality and a lack, right? It can be both. Any others that you'd like to name?
Yeah, I think focus is really, really important. And I mean, we work really hard as an investor to be clear about what exactly we're trying to achieve. And I think it's important to have that same effort from the investee side of the story. If for no other reason than that they could clearly articulate what it will be. So, we're working in many cases with very early stage businesses that have a lot of work to do in developing their model. They'll probably maybe pivot their model a few times as they're working to build traction with their customer base. And so, and I think this may be a bit more of a concern on the fund side as well, but, I've seen lots of pitches where the story of what this will be is pretty vague and broad, and precision, I think, is really important, so that when someone is sitting in front of you, you can actually get down to the level of, okay, so that revenue, that dollar comes from this party to that party and then goes there, and the IP is owned over here. I mean, I think those are actually conversations that one can have really early stage in meetings between investors and investees.
The detail really matters.
Yeah, the detail at that level. And it shouldn't be, the eighth conversation.
So we're going to do one more question, and then we're going to go a little 5 minutes past the little shot clock we have here because we started late. I'm going to grab that back. We're going to do one more question, and I'm going to ask the panelists a final question. Over here.
Sure. Thank you very much for the presentation. One of the subjects that was mentioned is the subject of mandates, especially in large foundations, pension funds such as CalPERS and others that have a fiduciary duty. What is the trend you're seeing around that? I mean, certainly mandates are appearing, but how fast are impact mandates appearing, and how much do you see them growing in the coming years?
Do you want to say?
We're seeing some exciting examples. So for instance, Zurich Insurance has a carve-out out of their private equity to invest in impact investments. We see AXA first setting up their own investments and then now setting up their second impact investment funds. So we definitely see newcomers from the institutional investor space coming up with mandate in order to go into this type of investments. But of course, it's still relatively early days. I think a lot of this conversation is about how to make this simple and simplify. And I would just say, let's not lose sight of the fact that 10 years ago, impact investing as a term didn't even exist. So while we are seeing newcomers coming into the space, and certainly the likes of BlackRock as well, I think there's a lot to learn, a lot to do it together. But we see the momentum, and we're quite excited about that.
So I'd like to ask the panelists in 30 seconds or less to give us a recommendation for what you would like to see that would make impact investing easier. Nick?
Consistent reporting of environmental, social, and governance metrics alongside a financial report, standard financial reporting.
Excellent. Giselle?
In the 7 years that the GIN has been at building this market, one thing that's really been remarkable and unique that we see in this space is this great generosity of spirit among the actors that are putting the capital to work. We really see this strong interest for those that are in the trenches, making deals happen, learning day to day, wanting to share what their experiences have been like, what the stumbling blocks have been, how they have solved them with those that may be new to the space, so that to help them along in their journey. So we think what is really critical is to have structured platforms and networking, really for these existing practitioners as well as newcomers to come together and engage, be it through the GIN or many other platforms and forums that are out there. And I think that's going to be key to really building the space.
So strong learning networks. Excellent.
Yeah, building off of that, I completely agree that people spend so much of their time doing this additional work of teaching and sharing and storytelling about their experience. The leading impact investors have contributed to much research that this group on the stage has produced. I think that just to put a tangible to do on all of our lists, I think it would be really amazing, and I am volunteering here and now to contribute to this, to make a map of the portfolios, like I said at the beginning, the portfolios of people who've been impact investing for 10 years or more and contributed, I don't know, let's say $50 million into the space. What has their portfolio grown to be? And if we could kind of find the areas of overlap and the gaps, I think that would be just a really compelling piece of information for someone who's coming to Debbie and saying, I'd like to enter this space. What's everybody doing? And you could show them with something like that.
Sounds like a new project. Very interesting.
I will very quickly follow my fellow panelists to say that both data and aggregation of data, but also information and sharing really would be the thing.
Aggregation of performance data and impact data.
Longitudinal data is always appreciated.
There we go, longitudinal data. Well, please join me in thanking our wonderful panel for this conversation this morning. Appreciate it.